Let us take a look at freedom of expression, or what is sometimes called freedom of speech. There are a lot of misconceptions about freedom of speech. So let's look at what it is not. It is not the right that other people have to listen to you speak. So if you speak and others don't want to listen to you, you can't force them. Freedom of expression doesn't give you that right. Also, it doesn't protect you from being hated or criticized for what you say. In Canada and in other democracies, the right to free expression is the right to say things within certain limits without being punished by the government, and it's enshrined in our charter. This is in the top left, and it says, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. It's important to realize that expression is more than just speech. It includes visual art, dance, music, and other kinds of conduct. For words, writing or speaking is just one way of trying to make a point. That's why it's freedom of expression rather than freedom of speech. If we look at this drawing, we don't quite know what it means or what the point of it is, but it's protected. It's a work of art. But if we look at this painting by Picasso's Guernica, its meaning is more obvious, and it too is protected by the freedom of speech, or freedom of expression. It's about the horrors and tragedies of war. But for the most part, let us consider freedom of expression and freedom of speech to be interchangeable. It won't really matter much, but when I say freedom of speech, I'll really mean freedom of expression. Though I'll try to keep it, try to be consistent about that. Now, it's important to note that freedom of speech is not an absolute right. It's not some right that trumps all other rights. There are limits to it. You cannot just say whatever you want, wherever you want, to whomever you want, without fear of legal repercussion. For instance, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That could lead to people rushing out of the doors and injuring each other, and you would be held legally liable for such behavior. You can't threaten people with violence. That's actually just assault, and indeed the law can punish you for it. We also have defamation laws in Canada and in most democratic countries, which prohibit certain kinds of speech. You cannot spread lies or falsehood that damage another person's reputation, and those things aren't protected by freedom of speech. There's a famous Canadian case, R.V. Keegstra, where a school teacher was prosecuted for making anti-Semitic claims and denying the Holocaust in his classroom. The Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court in the country, upheld the conviction against him for willfully promoting hatred, even though it violated, so to speak, his freedom of expression. Here, his freedom of expression right was trumped by the nature of his crime. The Supreme Court, in doing so, thus clarifies the limits on our free speech. We cannot actively promote hatred against a group of people. In Germany, for instance, it is explicitly illegal to promote Nazism, but in the US, promoting Nazism is protected by their free speech laws. Nowhere in the world does anyone have complete or absolute freedom of expression or freedom of speech. There's always going to be some limit about what you can say, and different countries will draw different lines of what is protected. So why is free speech valuable? One of the most famous defenses of free speech was given by John Stuart Mill in his book On Liberty. The opposite of free speech is, of course, censorship, and so we can think of a defense of free speech as a criticism of censorship. And Mill was staunchly opposed to censorship. He writes, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and that one had the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he would be in silencing them if he could." So what that means is, even if everyone except for one person in an entire society agreed on some policy or some belief, it would still be wrong to censor that one person who had the opposite opinion. And this isn't because of some inborn right that that person has or that anybody has, but that censoring one opinion is bad. Not for just that one person, but for everyone in society. And here's why Mill thinks. You might think that you want to censor false opinions because they're false, but Mill thinks that this implies that you are confident that you are right and that that is a false opinion. That, however, means that we're infallible. But no one is infallible, and by censoring somebody, we could be possibly losing out on the potential of finding some truth. Mill also thinks that the best way to discover the truth is through open discussion. So even though a dissenting opinion might be false, it can still be valuable in helping us find the truth, as it might contain some small kernel of truth, if not the whole truth, or even if it's largely misleading. Another point Mill raises for freedom of thought and expression is that it is important not to stifle opinions, even if we know them to be false. Even if we're dead certain that they're false, it's still valuable. What he means is that if we no longer hear opinions contrary to the majority opinion, then this majority opinion, even if true, becomes prejudice, just becomes something that we believe. We begin to hold on to our opinions without knowing why we should believe them. And this, for Mill, leads us away from self-development, and is opposed to the permanent interests of humanity. One thing to note about Mill's arguments is they don't rely on the idea that freedom of expression or freedom of speech is inherently good or right. It is good because they have good results. This is in line with Mill's consequentialist way of thinking. Freedom of expression is necessary for open discussion and critical engagement, which is necessary for discovering the truth and for understanding our own views. And all of that is necessary for our own happiness. One thing that I've been talking about is free speech with respect to the government, but Mill was also, if not more so, at least equally concerned with a culture that valued free speech, and not just free speech with respect to what the government can or cannot prohibit. Even if there are laws protecting our speech from the government, we cannot easily make everyone think that free speech is valuable. If most people never listened to contrary opinions or cared about disagreement, or just shunned anyone who disagreed, there isn't much we can do about it, but it would be a travesty, and the search for truth and through open discussion would be obstructed. So how does this apply to us? How does the internet affect freedom of expression? Well, for one, there are fewer borders. Your audience on the internet is larger than your audience within a country. So this means that if you promote Nazism on the internet while being in the United States, you could be prosecuted in Germany because your words, your speech, reach their domain. The internet also makes it hard to identify who the speakers are. Right? This has a few consequences, some good and some bad. One, this anonymity means people are more likely to voice disagreement, dissenting opinions, because people sometimes don't say certain things because they don't want to be disliked. Two, it makes it harder for the government to punish you if they don't know who you are. So even if some speech that isn't protected by the law might in turn be protected by your anonymity. Three, it makes it easier to distribute dangerous or harmful material, such as child pornography or how to make weapons.